We are AP, and we're just finishing up our discussion of the book. We talked yesterday about big picture. I gave you a sample. I'm not going to use that, the one about the past. But you have to, I think it was somebody, I think it was in here, maybe it was the other class. They were honest, and they said they don't get the big picture yet. They don't have the meaning, and I appreciate that. But we can't run away from it. That's what they're looking for. If you want those 8 and 9s on the test, you're going to have to do what they're asking. And I ask it every time, and you can't avoid it. I mean, you can avoid it, but it's going to come back, and you're going to have to eventually be able to say, what is this? What is the meaning of the book? What's the meaning of anything? Like, what's the big idea here? And I'm giving you this because it's a big book, and we read as much as we could, and I hope you read more of it. But these are some of the things that happen. Just the who, what, when, where, and whys of the book. Maybe some of you can help us talk about some of these details as we finish it up. I was rereading it last period, sections of it, and I lost, that's where I was led. I lost track of time. I realized I was into it, reading it and remembering it. Especially the way the judge ends, that's pretty poignant. But anyway, can anybody out here tell me, and I'd write it down, you need to be able to be familiar with how the book ends so you can adequately describe what it's about. Who is Sybil Fry? What's that story? Anybody know what that's about? Yeah, Claire.
Didn't Tom Stark get, like, that girl pregnant, or
Yeah.
her pregnant?
Yeah.
And then McMurphy, like, threatened if he didn't watch over the child that he would, I guess, like, tell the public about it and make Willie lose his political position.
Now, I don't think that would work today. Do you? Do you think a politician's daughter or son having a baby out of wedlock is going to do much anymore? I mean, we've gone way past that, but you have to put yourself, 70 years ago, 80 years ago, 90 years ago? We're talking about 1939, so 80 years ago. That would have been a big deal. And so McMurphy can use that against, if it gets out, he can use that against the boss. What is Willie's ultimate, ambition? He's governor, 2-time governor, unlike Huey Long. He was only 1-time governor, but the person he was based on. What's his long-term ambition? Like, what does he want to do? Just be governor? And that's it, ever? Yeah. Senator, and ultimately, maybe he doesn't mention it here, but President of the United States. The real Huey Long did start, he announced his run for presidency. So this could be bad for him way down the road. And so that's the political part. Everything's political to politicians. It doesn't matter your personal life. We talked about that yesterday. All right, how does Willie plan to use the dirt that Jack found on the judge to help get Willie out of this? So this is where the judge comes in. Remember, he said, first chapter, he said, go find some dirt on the judge. And here it is near the end of the book, and he finally decides, hey, did you ever find any dirt on the judge? So what's the connection? What's the connection between Sybil Fry and Judge Irwin? Can anybody explain that? Yeah. 8 through 10, what do you, okay, sorry. I had 2 sets up here. Well, I only was able to run out one of these, so just take a few notes. We'll skip over to this next. There are a couple of these. Sybil Fry, she's on here. Is she on here? No, she should be on here. Put Sybil Fry down, and the other one is, what does Willie have to do with that? Then we'll get to the judge. That's everything else. I think we got it covered. So Sybil Fry, we just answered that. And then what does that have to do with the judge? What does Sybil Fry have to do with the judge? Like, Willie's in trouble. He's going to be blackmailed for his son having a baby with Sybil Fry. Go to the judge. Why? Even if you didn't read that or understand it, if you understand politics, yeah.
Well, it was something like the judge like had so much of a role in like getting her Murray to like where he was politically, to where like whatever the judge tells him where he like he's gonna listen to him.
Yeah, so the judge can put the brakes on McMurphy, so McMurphy won't get it out in the news that Tom has a baby out of wedlock. So that's what he wants the judge to do, and that's why Jack goes to the judge's house, and now you got the questions in front of you, and he tells him that. Anybody want to describe that? If you haven't read it, read it. That's what was keeping me here. I was lost track of the time because that is a great scene. Tell me, why does the judge kill himself? You really have to understand why Jack was there to understand. He's there to put political pressure on him. Layla.
Because he realized that Jack knew about the bid and he was trying to blackmail him.
Yes. Jack knew about Mortimer, what's his name? Little Paul. What a great name. Such an insignificant person that he was taken advantage of. His name was Little Paul. So he knows that Jack is there to put pressure on him, and he won't do it. He won't do it. I'm not gonna change my position on this. I'm not going to put pressure on McMurphy. And the judge says, you ever heard of Mortimer Little Paul? I mean, Jack says, you ever heard of Mortimer Little Paul? And they get into why Mortimer Little Paul killed himself. And they still didn't answer the question, why does Jack kill himself? Why does the judge kill himself? You got all this stuff swirling around. Sybil Fry, McMurphy, now goes back 25 years to what he did. Anybody, why does he kill himself? Anybody can explain that?
He didn't want to handle the truth when it came out. He would be able to handle if it came out to the public.
I think that's a factor, and that's what Jack thinks the reason is. But if we look at it, which we don't have time to, but if we look at it closely, part of it is, if I kill myself, that information won't come out. And if I kill myself, you can't use me politically. Now you can use me politically. You can hurt a lot of people with that information. But if I'm dead, nothing happens. Now, we said that suicide is a way of escaping, and I certainly don't condone it. I don't think it's never the right thing to do. But in this case, in this book, is there anything maybe a little bit noble about what he does? Could you make the case that the judge is he's taking a hit for a long, he's sort of sacrificing himself, for something greater? I think you might be able to make that case. He's not killing himself because he's afraid of the information getting out. He's afraid of what that information's going to do to other people, and how it could. And so now he's no longer can be used. And of course, how did Jack lose two fathers? You didn't know this already. He doesn't even know this. He leaves the house. He goes home because he's visiting his mother's house in order so he could go talk to the judge. And his mother screams, and she tells him, remember what she tells him? You killed your father. And it sounds like that scene from Star Wars, doesn't it? Explain. Can anybody explain who's his father? Who is Ellis Burden? Anybody want to explain that? Nope. Can you explain it, Eloise?
Mr. Powell?
Hello? Yes. Well, no. Who's it out? May is out, May Bradley's out. Sure. Never done that before. And never called early to find out who's here, who's not here. Anyway, Jack loses 2 pots. Nobody wants to explain that? So who is Jack's father? Judge Irwin. Well, I thought Ellis Burden was. He thought Ellis Burden was his father. So how did that happen? What's the backstory? So Ellis Burden was married to Jack's mother when the judge had an affair. He was married. The judge was married. His mother was married. Ellis Burden was married to Jack's mother, and the judge has an affair with her. The baby's conceived. Ellis Burden knows it's not his son, so that's why he leaves and becomes the recluse who lives in the slums. But the question Jack kept asking, why didn't Judge Irwin ever marry my mother? Do you know why he never married? Ellis Burden goes back home. I mean, he leaves home, is what I'm trying to say. So now she's no longer married. She's available. But why does the judge not marry her? Because he's still married. And the woman he married is an invalid. And he's too noble to divorce her. He doesn't divorce her because she needs him. So it adds to that picture of these people that are really bad people, but they always do good things. Or they often do good things. Like that was a noble thing to do, and yet he had an affair, which is a very bad thing to do. But they're both the same person. So. Do you know how Tom is? That's that whole business. And of course, that's when Jack finds out. How is Tom injured? Whatever happens to Tom? Yes.
Like when he's playing football, like he gets hit, and then he ends up in a coma, and then he's paralyzed.
Yes, and eventually dies from it. So Tom dies. The baby is born. Does it say this? I think one of the questions is this. Yeah, number 8. Whatever happens to the baby that's born? Yes.
Doesn't Lucy take care of it?
Lucy does. And doesn't she name, what does she name him? I've even forgotten that. Willie? They named my favorite line in the book is when she says, they're talking about, is Willie a great man? And even though he's been so bad to her, he was planning to stay with her, by the way, before he gets killed. He had agreed to stay with her. He was going to marry, who was he going to marry? He's going to marry Anne. Anne's in love with him. I don't get that, but she says she's in love with Willie because of who he is. And Willie and she were going to marry, but he decides to stay married to Lucy. So there's some good things about him, and Lucy thinks he's a great man. That's one of the last things in the book, is that she thinks he's a great man. Okay, who kills Willie, and why? Anybody know who killed Willie? Adam killed him. And why does Adam kill him? Yes.
Didn't he find out about the affair?
Yes. And so he killed him. That's not the way Huey Long was killed. I don't think he wasn't killed by somebody he knew, I don't think, or at least not in anything like that context. So Willie is killed. And who kills Adam? Sugar Boy kills him. The so-called bodyguard didn't do much bodyguarding that day, but he kills Adam. So he loses his best friend, he loses his boss, he loses his father, And he lost two fathers because, how did he lose two fathers? His real father dies, but in what sense did he lose another father? Caroline?
The man he thought he was his father, he realized he wasn't.
Right, and so he loses him as a father. So he's lost, there are four people that he loses in a way in this short period of time. And Tiny Duffy comes back to haunt Willie because, remember, he kept Tiny on as lieutenant governor because he wanted to keep his enemies close. But what was Tiny's role in the death of Willie? Yeah.
He's the one who told Adam about the affair and then basically told him to go and kill him.
Yeah, and he didn't even have to do that. He knew that was going to happen. But he's the one who informed Adam about it, knowing that Adam was Adam was the guy that, I don't know if you remember the part about Herbert Coffey had to reread that, but Herbert Coffey's the guy that comes and visits Adam to basically bribe him, and Adam knocks him out. And that was a little indication that Adam was, not really, what would you call somebody like that? He could act on a whim. That's not the word I'm looking for, but
Impulsive.
thank you, that works. Impulsive. Even though he's such a smart guy and such an idealistic guy, he kills a man. He murders a man. Sadie Burke, what was her role? At the end of the book, Jack has to go hunt her down. She's lost Willie, which she loved, was in love with Willie, and she had a role in that too, in passing the information. I think she was the one. Wasn't she the one that informed Tiny, and then Tiny? It was that kind of thing, But everybody was trying to get. She passed along some information that that Jack is trying to figure out, and of course Jack knows that he can eventually hurt Tiny, because Tiny's now governor. When Willie is killed, Tiny becomes governor temporarily. We know what happens to Tom's baby. What happens to Anne Stanton at the end of the novel? A lot of people think that this makes the novel inferior because Anne and Jack finally get married at the end of the novel. Well, now, how could you make the argument that makes the novel inferior? Like, what's inferior about that? Yes.
It's sort of like a happy ending amongst none of the happy endings, where most people probably think none of the characters deserve happy endings.
And so you're saying it's a bit artificial, it's a bit, the word melodramatic, kind of artificially happy, like this shouldn't happen. Given what happened for 599 pages, this shouldn't be happening. And so people do criticize the book for that reason. What happens to Jack Burton at the end of the novel? What is he doing now? What does he suggest he might do in the future? There are two things he takes care of at this point in the book. What are they? Two kind of unfinished business. Well, Anne is one of the unfinished business. He marries her. What's the other bit of unfinished business? Yes.
Doesn't his father move in with him?
Yes, he takes care of his father. He and Anne take care of the father. I'd forgotten that. But he finishes his PhD. He goes back to Cass Master and takes care of that. You know what he's going to do in the future? It just hints this at the end that he's going to join Hugh Miller, the guy that resigned from Willie's attorney general, who is now running for governor. Hugh Miller's running for governor, and Jack's going to work for him to do some of the same kind of work, except probably not the blackmail and that kind of thing. So I wanted you to have an idea of how the book ends. Two things that just struck me as we finish. I don't know if I can find this now. Well, I don't guess I need to read this, but I thought this was interesting. When the people of Louisiana find out that they kind of know that Jack's having affairs. I mean, not Jack, but Willie's having affairs. They kind of know that, and they're good with that. And there's this passage in there. It goes back to the Bill Clinton thing we mentioned yesterday, and according to the writer, they're good with that. They're good with Willie looking respectable, but having something going on the side. They're good. They're not shocked by that. They're actually good with that because, as Robert Penn Warren says, that's what they would do. Now, I think that's not everybody would do that or be good with that, but that's how the author describes it. The average person would be okay, like the perfect situation, have a respectable wife and family, but then have a mistress on the side. That is definitely a dark view of human nature, but that's how he explains it. And the other thing, I just thought I would read this for you. I don't know what the page number is in your book. It's literally the last page, last 2 pages of chapter 7. And this talks about the judge. So I left my father and he went back to his father, walked down the road, Ellis Burton's father. I had by this time grown accustomed to think him as my father, but this meant that I had disaccustomed myself to thinking of the man who had been the scholarly attorney as my father. There was a kind of relief knowing that that man was not my father, talking about Ellis Burton. He's glad Ellis Burton wasn't his father. I'd always felt some curse of his weakness upon me, or what I had felt to be that. He had a beautiful, young, eager wife, and another man had taken her away from him and had fathered his child. And all he had done was to walk away, leaving her in possession of everything he owned, and crawl into a hole in the slums and lie there like a wounded animal, and let his intellect bleed away into pious drivel, and his strength bleed away into weakness. And he had been good, but his goodness had told me nothing except that I could not live by it. My new father, however, had not been good, but had been cuckolded a friend, and I noticed, like Cass. That's exactly what Cass did to Duncan. He had taken his wife and had an affair. Judge Irwin did the same thing to Jack's so-called father. He had cuckolded a friend, betrayed a wife, taken a bribe, driven a man, though unwittingly, to his death. But he had done good. He had been a just judge. He had carried his head high. That last afternoon of his life, he had done that. He hadn't said, "Look here, Jack." Oh, yeah, what did he not tell Jack when Jack left? He was getting ready to tell him something, and he doesn't tell him. And we don't know, but what do you think he was going to tell him? He said, "Oh, by the way, before you leave here," he said, "Oh, never mind." And so Jack leaves. What was it that he might have told? We don't know, but you have any idea what that might have been? Yeah.
That he was his father?
Because that would have stopped Jack. Jack would have dropped it right there. He could have told him that, "I'm your real father." That would have ended it, because he knew Jack wouldn't have done it, given the information away if it had been his real father. So anyway, he basically, oddly enough, he respects Judge Irwin more than he respects Ellis Burton, who had what else is he going to do? His wife cheated on him, and he walked away, gave up everything to his wife, and somehow Jack admires Judge Irwin better than that guy, because Judge Irwin, he sees, has more strength than Ellis Burden. Anyway, that's how the book ends. Tomorrow you're going to have an opportunity to write about that. So we only have 5 minutes left. Any last questions about it? We're not leaving, but just be prepared. Bring your book, bring your notes. I don't want you to look it up. You don't know what I'm going to ask you anyway. I don't even know what I'm going to ask you. But just know the book. When you go into the test in May, you don't know what they're going to ask you, and you don't know what book you're going to write about, so you got to know books. Just know the book thoroughly, and please figure out what you think the meaning of the book is. It's one of those things. And bring ink, pen, you're going to need that, and plenty of paper.